Are modern English longbows too short? Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So this is a response video to Anthony Cummins over at the Samurai Ninja History channel. Link to the specific video below here in the description. And so I've been chatting with Anthony recently about a few things, and he has a longbow, and obviously he's known mostly for his Japanese warfare stuff, particularly ninja related things, and samurai as well. But he's also a fan of European weapons, and he did quite an interesting topic actually for a video. Are modern recreations of English longbows too short? Obviously this is my response. This is quite a general question, and obviously a lot of the longbows being made and sold today aren't replicas of medieval or Renaissance style English longbows. They're actually kind of 18th, 19th century style target longbows. That is, they flex with the D section, have quite a rigid center. Medieval English bows, at least certainly if we judge this based on the artwork, and if we base this based on the Mary Rose longbow finds as well, which is basically the main piece of information we've got to go from when it comes to medieval English longbows. Most of them bend what are known as a full compass bow, so they bend fully through the whole section of the bow. They bend equally right the way through, and this enables you, it leads to perhaps a slightly less pleasant shooting experience if you're looking at light draw weight target archery. But what enables you to do is have very big bows with very high power and the limbs be able to sustain those very high draw weights, which is harder to do when you've only got the upper and lower limbs flexing with a simple yew bow. So if you're using a yew wood self bow made of one piece of wood with the sap and the heartwood, then having a full compass bow, I believe anyway, the main reason is it enables you to have higher draw weights and for that bow to still operate. It's also using a greater portion of the wood as well as an energy storing and then output device as well. So some people would argue it's perhaps more, certainly on the higher draw weights, it might be a more effective way of storing energy and then shooting it into an arrow. But to answer the question, are modern recreations too short? Well, it depends where you're getting your recreation from. So there are some people making very faithful replicas of Mary Rose bows. But his fundamental question is about height and length. The length of the bows relative to average height. And this relates to things that I've made in the past about sword replicas, and Anthony as well has also raised this question. So for example, if we look at Japanese swords, clearly the average height of a Japanese warrior in the 16th century using a katana or a tachi was only about 5 foot tall. So if you're me and you're 6 foot tall, or just over 6 foot tall, then indeed you should probably be using a longer sword. And I've made this argument myself. So does that translate to longbows? Is that true for longbows as well? Well, first of all, we have to look at what lengths of longbows are there and what are the heights of the users, not the average heights of people, and I'll come to that point in a second. So first of all, in terms of the data that we have to go on for the lengths of the longbows available, well, we only really, with a couple of exceptions, we only really have the Mary Rose bows to go from. Certainly that's their 16th century military longbows. We know that they're not hunting bows, we know that they are English, we know that they are 16th century, 1545, the Mary Rose sank, so they're a bit late. There may have been some changes, and these are the caveats we have to add in. First of all, it was a royal, I think it was a flagship, so it was a very important, for Henry VIII, it was a very important ship, and there were elite archers shooting these bows. So these bows might not be typical. They might be longer, they might be heavier, higher draw weights, we don't really know. That's possible than a typical archer's bow of 1545. Equally, it might be that those bows in 1545 aren't very representative of what an elite archer or an average archer might have been using at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, which was over a century earlier. So 130 years earlier. So, and equally, was a longbow used at Agincourt the same as a longbow used at Cressy? We don't know. So we don't know if English longbows, if they got longer, if they got shorter, if they got heavier, if they got lighter. We have some period sources from the 16th century from England bemoaning the decline of English archery, but we don't know if that means that the best archers of the 16th century were not as good as the best archers of Agincourt of the early 15th century, or if it simply means that there are fewer good archers around. It could be that the best archers in 1545 were just as good as the best archers in 1415 and shooting almost exactly the same types of bows and arrows. Or it could be that there were some differences. So a huge number of caveats we've got to throw in there, that we just simply we can't say something based on the Mary Rose bows and say that it definitely applies to all English longbows for the whole medieval period. We just don't know. But what we have to go on in the Mary Rose bows. So I pulled up the data. Let's just have a little look here to remind myself. So the Mary Rose bows in length vary between 1.87 m and 2.11 m. For the imperialists of you out there like me, 6'2" long and 6'11" long. So I'm about 6'1". I'm shade under 6'1". So all of those bows are longer than me. Now 6'11" is really long. Okay, now Anthony makes an assumption then, makes a statement about the average height of medieval men. Now, this is a difference, and this is where we have to get back into the caveats again. So the problem is that these Mary Rose longbows were being used by professional archers on Henry VIII's flagship, Mary Rose. And we know, in many cases from the skeletons, because skeletons of the archers survived, that these guys were not small, were not malnourished. Some of them had signs of injury and disease and were a variety of ages. But we know from some of the skeletons that they had, shall we say, adaptations to their skeleton, which had come about probably from intensive archery practice, which incidentally might give credence to the fact that these were elite archers and probably, maybe, just as good as elite archers were in the Wars of the Roses or the 100 Years' War or whatever. So these were guys who'd practiced archery a lot, and they had some compression, curvature of the spine, compression of the left arm, all this kind of stuff. So these guys weren't average people. So an average townsperson or an average farmer of 1545. Indeed, their average male height might have been 5'6", 5'7", perhaps even 5'8", which is what it was in the Anglo-Saxon period. Depending where they live, rural populations, as far as I recall from my archaeology studies when I was an archaeologist and the data then available, rural communities tended to have better diets than urban communities and live in less crowded and more sanitary conditions in many cases. And so people were more susceptible perhaps to certain types of disease and in things that impeded their growth during childhood mostly. So rural communities very often were taller than urban communities. So again, you might find if some archers are from Chester, from the city, and some archers are from rural Shropshire, both places where you got lots of archers from, there might have been an average height difference between them. Equally, archers from London, I would say on average, will probably be slightly shorter than archers from out in the countryside somewhere. So there's that. The second thing is that these were elite archers. These were an elite bodyguard, essentially, an elite form of soldier. Kind of think about, Navy SEALs or SAS or things like, or paratroopers or whatever. These are guys who are at the top of their game. Okay, so they're not necessarily going to be the average guys. They are going to be the guys who are very good archers and probably for the most part are pulling heavy bows and are strong, athletic, fit, healthy guys. And I know that at least one of the archers is over 6 foot tall. I think he's about my height. I think he's about 6'1", which on average terms is regarded as high in the tall in the 16th century on paper when you take national averages, but actually amongst elite soldiers, maybe a lot of the elite soldiers were 6 feet tall. I mean, we don't have a huge data set to go from because most skeletons archaeologically that we find, we don't know whether they're a soldier or a farmer or a clergyman. We just don't know very often from graves or from random skeletons. But in this case, we know that these skeletons were soldiers and we know that some of them were quite tall, quite big, strong guys. So, back to the bows. Are the bows, what does that tell you about the length of the bows? Well, generally speaking, what it should tell you is that if the bows are from 6'2" to 6'11", that is taller than most of even the elite soldiers would have been. But in some cases, it may not have been much taller. So, without whittering on for too much longer, I estimate, based on the fact that the bows vary between 6'2" and 6'11", and most of the elite soldiers using the bows were probably between about 5'8" and maybe 6'2" or 6'3". That's a guess based on the data available. I would say that it seems like longbows are supposed to be about 6 inches taller or longer, perhaps even 6 to 8 inches taller than the person using them, based purely on the Mary Rose sample. And again, the Mary Rose is not necessarily typical. Elite soldiers, elite bows, elite ship, maybe, and it's 16th century, it's not 15th century or 14th century, all of those caveats there. But based on the evidence, based on the Mary Rose and the evidence we have, it seems to me like medieval and 16th century longbows are supposed to be about that much taller than the person who's using them. I hope that's useful. I hope that answers Anthony's question. Go and check out Anthony's channel as well, because he's got loads of really cool videos. And like I say, we've been talking quite a bit, and I'm sure we're going to be doing some collaboration stuff in the future. So share your thoughts and comments below. Check out Anthony's channel, and I'll see you really soon on Schola Gladiatoria channel for another video. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.